In this series of videos, I'll be going over the process of UV unwrapping, also known as UV mapping. So what is UV mapping? Well, UV mapping is basically the process of projecting a 2D image, so any sort of text image you might have got online or you might have made yourself, onto a three-dimensional surface. So for instance, this cuboid right here. When you UV unwrap, you're basically unwrapping that particular 3D object and laying it flat on a 2D surface. So you're creating a net. You might have done those in, say, high school in maths class, for instance, and you can kind of see it here as well. So this cuboid here has kind of like this net shape, and basically these lines or these faces here represent the faces, edges, and vertices in a three-dimensional object. So for instance, if I quickly go to face here and select that face, you'll see that it also selects the corresponding face in the perspective view, which is this bottom one here. Now, some people have asked me, is it possible to get rid of these? You can't, because again, these represent the faces, edges, and vertices on your object. So if I wanted to get rid of a UV shell or UV face, I would have to literally just delete that face. So you'll see right now that that face, that UV set is gone because that face no longer exists on a 3D in the 3D space. You can never get rid of these. As long as there's something three-dimensional, some sort of vertex, edge, line, polygon face, there's always going to be UVs. What your job is as a 3D modeler or 3D artist is to actually successfully UV unwrap it so that the net, for instance, is much more appropriate for this shape. Right now, this doesn't look very appropriate for the sort of cuboid that we got. It's okay for say like a basic cube, like this, for instance, but something like that wouldn't really work well enough. We'd have to use the UV unwrapping tools, such as the planar mapping or the cylindrical mapping, to make it much more appropriate. So I have another cuboid here, and we'll quickly compare the two UV shells. So this is the one here, has a sort of basic sort of net shape there, and this is the one that I have UV unwrapped. So you can kind of see it's a lot more different. These UV shells look a lot more appropriate to that particular object here. In fact, it's basically like a flat 2D version of it. So these three faces here represent these three faces there. And it kind of looks similar to it as well. So just to quickly go over the UV editor. These things here, the lines or faces, whatever you want to call them, are known as UV shells. So if I select the shell here, you'll see that it also selects the corresponding faces, edges, and vertices in the 3D scene. So this represents these faces here, and the ones on the side as well. In the next set of videos, we'll be going through how to use the tools here in the UV editor, and how to plan out, unwrap, and how to appropriately space stuff in the UV editor. Now, one thing I will say is that you are limited to a certain amount of space in your UV editor. You can't just place things all over the place or have them as big as you want. When you're UV unwrapping, you have to make sure that they all fit within this grid here. Why? Because what we do after that is once it's all successfully UV unwrapped, we take a snapshot of it and then we put it into Photoshop and we apply our textures on top of that. Rather than doing what we did in the past where we just apply a texture, use a planar mapping to kind of stretch it across the object, when we take this into Photoshop, we have a substantial amount of degree of control as to what we can put on that object, and also add the sort of really finer details that you can't get by just simply placing an image on top of it. So what we'll do now is we'll go on to the next part of the tutorial. The next part will be either a tutorial of the UV editor, or to actually use the planar and cylindrical mapping options. You can watch them in any order that you want. You can just all those videos will be up right next to one another, so you can pick which one you want to watch and use that to help you UV unwrap.